I remember we had visited Jaipur for a meeting on prison reform, and Professor Jean Drèze, the architect of the Employment Guarantee Act, which has just been passed by Parliament, suggested that we visit some of the villages of Jaipur. 5 kilometers outside Jaipur city, we saw the FCI godowns with grain so overflowing. The grain was kept outside the godowns, and the water had, the rain had fermented the grain and it was rotting. And 5 kilometers from that godown where grain was in abundance, we saw a village where people were eating in rotation, what is classically called rotation eating, rotation hunger, where some members of the family eat on one day and the remaining persons eat on the other day. And on that simple basis, namely that there was 60 million tons, this was 2001, 2002, 60 million tons of grain in the Food Corporation of India godowns. The buffer stock required was 20 million tons. Government had 40 million tons above the buffer stock, and people were dying of starvation in the country. There were reports all over the country. On that simple proposition, the PUCL in Rajasthan filed a case which came to the Supreme Court. There is a crisis of historic proportions, where hunger, malnutrition, starvation, consumption of food is going down so dramatically and on such a large scale, so precipitously. We are probably reaching levels akin to the levels that existed prior to independence in India. There is an awesome crisis of hunger deepening in our country.
Our policy failures both on the food front and on agriculture, because if people do not have income, they would not be able to enjoy, they would not be able to buy food from the PTS, however cheap it may be. So therefore one has to take an overview of the policy issues and also then think of what needs to be done on various fronts. There should be no food insecurity in our country, because both, if you look at the last 50 years again, both GDP and food grain production have increased at a rate faster than the growth in population. But even then, a very large number of people go hungry, especially during the rains. And a recent survey of Jharkhand shows that up to 14% people go without meals for many days at a stretch. In the last 4 years, we have exported food grains to the tune of 28 million tons, mostly as cattle feed, mostly at a very subsidized rate. So therefore, rather than feeding people of our own country, we are feeding cattle of other countries. This shows how the food production, we talked about agriculture production earlier, but this is food production, how it has remained constant after 1987-88, whereas availability is going down. One of the reasons why availability has gone down is because government has bought and kept it in its godowns, so that it's not available for people. Also, it has been exported, and in the last 3 years, the total comes to 28 million tons almost at the BPL price, and for mostly as cattle feed.
Sometime in 1996, December 1996, there was a petition, a PIL, submitted to the Supreme Court by the Indian Council of Legal Aid and Advice and others, alleging some starvation deaths in KBK region of Orissa. Supreme Court also advised the petitioners to approach the NHRCs with the request for some interim measures which need to be taken immediately. In that background, the matter was taken up by the NHRC, and the NHRC, Justice Venkatachela was the chairperson at that time, found that this is a matter which requires in-depth examination. Some immediate measures are required, because a team led by the Secretary General at DGI visited this area. They went to those places from where the reports had come, and their conclusion was that this is an area afflicted by high level of deprivation, low income, insufficient release to relief measures, and the repeated frequent crop failures, damages, etc. And the deaths, though these were not strictly clinically, in clinical terms, the starvation deaths, the deaths were due to prolonged hunger and malnutrition compounded by disease. And that is what makes the whole perception clear. Why do people die? Why bodies are so enfeebled that they cannot face the attack of a diarrhea and die of diarrhea, die of malaria? How does it operate? How the state responds, how the relief coordinates. Here the state intervenes when the hunger has already taken its toll. A person has to die to become eligible for relief, because it is only after the person dies that compensation, etc. Whereas the person should be made a stake, he should be enabled to claim his right. And that is where we said that there is a need for paradigm shift to change the very perception that mortality should not be taken as a proof of starvation.
Years as a journalist and 12 years as a full-time rural reporter, I have never seen anything approaching the levels of rural distress as I have since 98-2000. It has been extraordinary, it's been heartbreaking, and really extremely worrying. The collapse of which I'm talking goes far beyond agriculture. It is not the nature of agriculture, though it accounts for a much smaller share of your GDP today, since it employs 65% of your population in one way or the other. The nature of agriculture is that even if agriculture does badly, everybody does badly. The carpenters do badly. When you look at the records of the starvation deaths, you will find in Andhra a number of carpenters have died of hunger deaths. Why? Because when agriculture ceases to have anything going for it for 3 years, no one orders a new plow. No one orders a recycling of implements or tools. No one orders a new axe. No one makes a new bullock cart. The carpenter starves. So you will find weavers, carpenters, their markets deprived by the collapse of agriculture, also being victims. Please don't imagine that this is a crisis of agriculture. It is an agrarian crisis. It involves all the sectors of rural society. One of the greatest crises of agriculture and the agrarian societies is water. And this country is firmly moving on the path of privatization of water, which will cause a civil war in your countryside. This has been a natural resource, a God-given resource. People have always utilized it according to the rainfall. We are privatizing rainfall in that sense. Farming is now gambling. It is the Russian roulette. You know, the Russian soldiers used to play in World War II. One bullet in the gun, you switch it, put it to your head. If you're lucky, it doesn't go through your brain. It's called Russian roulette. Farming is today Russian roulette. You sow too soon, you have a drought. You sow twice, you have extra doubled input costs. Sometimes you get floods and it gets wiped out. It's become an extreme gamble for a lot of people. But it's not just that. The same communities are hurt by the commercialization of just about everything. Health costs have gone up. Education costs have gone up. Travel costs have gone up. We are talking about 260 million people in the country whom the government of India admits are poor. That is the official admission. For these people, all these prices have gone up. For hundreds of millions of Indians, globalization, sir, has been the globalization of prices, the Indianization of incomes. We know and we can show you that the government numbers are false, and at least because there was a regime change in Andhra Pradesh, some of the more real figures have come out. The government of Andhra Pradesh no longer denies that 3,000 suicides occurred in the Rayalaseema region. More than 2,000 of them in the Anantapur district alone. The suicides, tragic as they are, and I have lived with 350 of them, are still only a symptom of a much larger distress. They are only a symptom, not the cause, not the process of a much larger rural and agrarian distress. The policies that brought that out, and look, the policies that brought that about included the cuts in development expenditure from 1991, the collapse of rural credit at a time when prices were going up. The water policies of this government are going to be the biggest battlefield of contention in our society in the next few years. Investment in agriculture, as Professor Patnaik explained to you, fell below. Soaring input costs were another part of the crisis. Soaring commercialization of education that really put a lot of pressure on poor people, causing the farms to withdraw their children from schools. Global commodity prices, against which we have removed a lot of protections for our farmers, while the United States and the European Union introduce ever more protection for their farm producers. And All these, the collapse of social banking, the idea that banks have a responsibility towards society, all these came together in the 90s to to cause some of the distress. For me, the saddest part is in my own profession. I think we can describe the process which I'm talking about as the predatory commercialization of the countryside. Yeah. The predatory commercialization of the countryside. All human value has been converted into exchange value. People have to pay for things that they never paid for. People who have lived off livelihoods based on exchange can no longer do so. I would like to leave you with this, that in my own profession, and it shows you how seriously we are taking this crisis. Agriculture affects 650 million people in this country. I did a check in 2003 and I've been doing this check every year since then. How many people went out and covered the crisis at its worst from the so-called national media? Total number I could get was 6. The biggest agrarian crisis since the Green Revolution, total number of national journalists spending 1 week in the countryside, 6. Total number of journalists covering Lakme India Fashion Week in Delhi, 412 accredited journalists plus 100 journalists with daily passes. Something has gone seriously wrong.
The public distribution system, as Colin has mentioned, is one of the largest food subsidy programs in the world, providing subsidized food grains to nearly 20 crore families. And of these 20 crore families, 8 crore are the poorest of the poor, which includes people below the poverty line as officially defined, and also 2 crores of people who get it under the Antodaya scheme, which is even more subsidized than the BPL. And its linkages with other schemes. In itself, it's a large scheme, but its linkages with the other schemes, with the employment guarantee schemes and so on, makes it one of the most critical links in the entire food safety net program of India. A complete sabotage of the public distribution system, particularly in recent times. We had a shift from a universal public distribution system to a targeted public distribution system, despite a dramatic increase in procurement, which meant that there was a shift to reduce the number of people who were taking benefits out of the public distribution system. And even within these limited numbers, the Planning Commission estimates that food grains don't reach 57% of the poorest families. And the irony is that it doesn't reach the poorest family in the poorest states. The most important factor in the sabotage of the PDS, and I'm sure with the number of cases in courts pending now, one would know that the rice miller lobby, the millers lobby, the transport contractors lobby are really the lobbies which are running the system now.
NDTV chased 3 trucks which came out of FCI godowns, and they saw where did these trucks ultimately reach. Out of these 3 trucks, 1 truck went to a Modi mill, another truck went to a private godown. Diversion basically takes place at 2 places. One is that when the rations are diverted on their way from the FCI godowns to the ration shops itself, and the other is the ration that makes its way to the ration shops also doesn't reach the beneficiaries. It is diverted at the ration shops itself. In ration shops, the ration shopkeeper employs various methods to ensure that the beneficiaries don't get their ration. Either the shops don't open, even if the shops open, the ration is refused to the people saying there is no stock. Even if the ration is given to them, the ration shopkeeper gives a very bad quality and adulterated ration. He gives them less than their entitlements. He charges more than the prescribed rates. He weighs less. Ultimately, ration shopkeeper makes every effort to ensure that the beneficiary does not take ration from his shop. But whatever be the method of defalcation, ultimately it boils down to fudging of the records at the level of the ration shopkeeper. There are 3 kinds of records that he fudges. One is he makes a bogus entry in his daily sale register, he issues a bogus cash memo, and he makes false entries in the ration cards. According to Planning Commission reports, there is more than 57% of diversion taking place. So naturally, PDS Control Order and Essential Commodities Act are being violated by almost every shop owner in the country today. When these records are presented to the authorities, neither the police takes any action, they refuse to file FIR, nor the food department takes any action, because there seems to be an active collusion between the shop owners and the authorities. And this has clearly given out a signal to the shop owners that nothing is going to happen to them, and so shop owners divert rations with impunity. Inadequacy of rules and procedures. For instance, we have studied the rules and procedures. The rules don't prescribe what action are they supposed to take under what circumstances, what action are they supposed to take on specific types of complaints, in how much time, and who would be responsible. And third is also a very low commission of the shop owners. For instance, the commission which is given in Delhi to a kerosene oil depot is 7 paise per liter of kerosene, and on an average the quota of a shop is 10,000 liters. So it gives him about 700 rupees of gross receipts in a month. In this 700 rupees, he has to pay for his shop rent, he has to pay for his various expenses in the shop, and then from the balance he has to also sustain his family. Today he has a problem because he has been assigned one shop. If the shopkeeper does not behave properly, or if he does not give rations properly, the only option with the card holder is that he can go and complain. If we have a system whereby we give an option to the card holder to choose his own shop, so if I am a card holder, if I am not satisfied with the shop, I should have an option to go to any other ration shop in the city and take my rations. This will bring about internal competition within the shopkeepers, and will also prevent me. I mean, right now I have just one option to make a complaint. Tomorrow I need not make a complaint, I can go to another shop and take rations. Third is you need to hold the officials accountable, for which we have presented a chart to the government which lays down on how to deal with various types of complaints and grievances. Increase commissions of the shopkeepers to reasonable levels.
2004 was celebrated internationally as the Year of Rice. Now I am sure, ladies and gentlemen, if you scratch your head, you will realize that nothing significant happened in 2004 that we should be celebrating as the Year of Rice. For a few million farmers on either side of the Atlantic, the world today provides $1 billion of subsidies every day. For 600 million farmers in India, we provide a corresponding subsidy of $1 billion a year. And as we all know, in India, these subsidies are only input subsidies. They are not as a price support or an income support to the farmers. These are cheaper fertilizer, cheaper food, cheaper electricity, cheaper water to the farmers. In America, on the other hand, or in European Union, a farmer gets subsidy sitting at home. The minimum price that we are paying to our farmers has become the maximum price, but in reality, he is paying the price for the subsidies in those countries. Whether it is wheat, whether it is rice, whether it is milk, whether it is cotton, you name it, it's because of the subsidies in those countries that they have the comparative advantage. Remove these subsidies in the Western countries, they have no comparative advantage in any crop on which, of course, we are competitive, or which we are competing with them. The rich countries have got a lot of non-tariff barriers, trade barriers, market access parameters, and of course the subsidies to stop anything that can go from our countries into their countries. Whereas our countries have become a kind of a open market now. What does it mean for India? As I said, ladies and gentlemen, importing food for a country like India is importing unemployment. And when you have unemployment, the right to food is the first thing that gets paralyzed because of the unemployment scenario. What do we do with our 600 million farmers? If these 600 million people do not have the money in their hands, as was shown earlier also, they cannot buy. And that's one of the problems that right to food enshrines or is fighting for, which the right is being taken away by the international obligation that we have. And it doesn't stop here. The public distribution system also has to be dismantled in the days to come. There is a lot of effort on India, a lot of pressure on India to start dismantling the public distribution system, because WTO says very clearly that if you are providing a public distribution system, it actually adds on to your subsidy structure, and there is a limit to the subsidies that we can provide.
There is an increasing recognition worldwide that food and nutrition is a human right, and thus there is a legal obligation to assure that all people are adequately nourished. The right to food is recognized directly and indirectly all the world over. It's now a global movement. The United Nations has identified access to adequate food as both an individual right and a collective responsibility. Article 21 of the Constitution of India protects for every citizen a right to live with human dignity. Article 47 of the Constitution of India inter alia provides that the state shall regard the raising of the level of nutrition and the standard of living of its people and the improvement of public health as amongst its primary duties. The Apex Court has taken the first steps to tackle this issue of malnutrition and to reform and strengthen the food security system in India by observing, upon a petition filed by the PUCL, I quote, "The anxiety of the court is to see that the poor and the destitute and the weaker sections of the society do not suffer from hunger and starvation. The prevention of the same is one of the prime responsibilities of the government, whether central or the state. How this is to be ensured would be a matter of policy which is best left to the government. All that the court has to be satisfied and which it may have to ensure is that the food grains which are overflowing in the storage receptacles, especially of FCI godowns and which are in abundance, should not be wasted by dumping into the sea or eaten by the rats. Mere schemes without any implementation are of no use. What is important is that the food must reach the hungry."
An NGO in India, CARE, began importing genetically modified grain without informing the recipients that they were actually doing so. Genetically modified food is again a huge controversy. India is eminently placed because of its organic production to capture a huge niche market in organic food and organic food production. So increasingly in Europe, the markets are looking at organic food free of pesticides. And GM foods were imported surreptitiously into the country. Then there was a huge controversy, and then the NGO was forced to stop the import of grain.
Neoliberal group head denies in a conscientious and well-reasoned theoretical way the existence of the right to food. It says, well, if there is a famine and you are to give food, it is an act of humanity. So that's the one extreme. The other extreme is, and this sentence is the result of the total conference, what has affected me, it is this. He said that if anywhere in the world there is a death due to starvation, it is an assassination. Now, what I have learnt is that it is not a case of India not having food, a man having right to food, but not getting it from India, because there is no food in India, you die with your right. I have nothing to give, what shall I give you? It's a question of there being food, of the man being hungry, and of the man not getting food because of economic policies which stop food being given to him, which make food to be exported, and which continues to be stored in FCI godowns, which is stolen from FCI godowns.
The basic wants of the human being arise from hunger and forces of nature. The obligation of human beings, collectively as society or state, to ensure that no individual constituent is deprived of this basic necessity of life, gives rise to a corresponding right in the constituent to call upon society to fulfill this basic need for existence. In that sense, it is a fundamental right. But is it a fundamental right guaranteed by law? Any right that is guaranteed must necessarily be justiciable. Since the right to fulfillment of the need for food is inextricably connected with life itself, it is permissible to derive such a right from Article 21. In fact, the Indian Supreme Court has used Article 21 as some sort of a cornucopia from which several rights have been derived, such as the right to clean environment, right to minimum wages, right to education, and so on. Professor Amartya Sen, the noted Nobel laureate and economist, in his Arturo Tanco Memorial Lecture, delivered on 2nd August 1990, speaking on the topic of public action to remedy hunger, reiterated his famous thesis that famines occur not merely because of endemic deprivation of food, but on account of breakdown of the facilities for distribution which pertain to food. Professor Sen theorizes that famines happen not because of non-availability
of stocks of food, but because people do not have the purchasing power to buy food after loss of employment and so on. The second limb of Professor Sen's theory is that famines cannot be expected to happen in a democratic country like India, as there is a strong civil society networks such as free and fair press. Hence, in his thesis, justiciability would take the form of directing requisite state action in the form of employment guarantee schemes, famine relief schemes, and other similar relief measures.
Relating to drop in per capita food grains production. If I look at the year, 3 years ending in 1998, and compare with that the 3 years ending in 2003, then I find that food grains production per head has dropped from 176.8 kilograms per annum to 164 kilograms per annum per capita. Now this is a very serious matter because we are down to 153 kilograms per capita per annum now, which is one of the lowest in the world, which is highly abnormal. You don't get this kind of a drop normally when an economy has a positive rate of growth of per capita incomes. My proposition is that the reason we are getting this very abnormal drop in absorption in our country today really has to do with worsening income distribution. Now we know that in urban areas there is no drop. Actually the per diem calorie intake per person has also gone up in urban areas according to the latest data. So the drop is concentrated mainly in the rural areas, and since there is no drop in urban areas, the drop is far larger in the rural areas than the figures I've given to you, which is a very, very serious situation. The very fact of decline in growth rates in output mean that automatically you will have decline in employment as long as the labor coefficients are unchanged. But actually the growth rate of employment has fallen much more than the output growth rate has. We have had a real collapse of the rate of employment growth.
Clearly inequalities in land holdings, inequalities in wealth. And a third area, I think that we are still able to acknowledge the barriers and inequalities created by economic differences in income and assets. But the barriers created by the social barriers of gender and caste and disability and so on is something that I'd like to focus on. For instance, for street and working children, there are something like 50,000 on the streets of Delhi. I think it's significant that we don't even have a reliable official census of the numbers of homeless children on our streets. We see them, we drive past them, but there is, sadly not a single food scheme to ensure the nutrition of these children. Broadly, they get their food from 3 sources. One is rubbish heaps. The second is begging at temples and mosques and so on, gurdwaras. And the third is whatever money they buy, then they have to buy, they buy hot, very non-nutritious, greasy food.
When a child is born, a child is meant to have exclusive breastfeeding for a period of 6 months. Only breast milk for a period of 6 months. That is its right to food. But what is the state support for this? This comes from maternity entitlements, which are practically non-existent in the unorganized sector in our country. Completely so. Though the NMBS does figure in the list of 8 schemes that we're talking about. And this comes from the presence of creches on work sites. Again, in the unorganized sector, practically non-existent. I've spent about 11 years of my life dealing directly with urban poor children. And I really feel that this is an aspect that's not given sufficient thought to. Well, rural child does figure in our discourse, but the urban child is often left out, considered to be rich enough to fend for themselves. They come here, both parents work. Women's work is markedly different from her work in rural areas. She works much more for wages. She works much more for distances which are further from her home. She works much more in situations which are much less secure and much less in her control. And therefore, children's nutrition, as we've tried to show before the link, is definitely hampered. And the cash crunch. Now, these families, they don't come under the category of BPL. They will not be able to survive in a city if they're earning less than what, 1500 rupees. They might be earning 3000 or 4000 rupees, but they have to buy everything for cash. And since they do not fall under the category of BPL, they don't get any special interventions, and schemes also do not apply to them, which would have applied for the rural poor. Rural children, which is not to say discriminate against a rural child. We should not be fighting child against child, but it is to say that urban poverty must get its due consideration.
Wherever there are state laws which go against the rights of women to inherit in the agricultural holdings, do away with those laws. Otherwise, there is no meaning in saying eradicate hunger and right to food is a fundamental right. Without food, where is the fundamental right? Without agricultural land, how can you speak of this fundamental right? Give your ladies the right to hold property. Give them equal right. Abolish those state laws where such laws exist. And let us have equal laws, equal protection, and give something more to the ladies.
The reason why ICDS doesn't do so well are many. Number one, ICDS covers the age group 3 to 6 years, because when the scheme was started, this knowledge that the crucial age group is 6 months to 3 years, so therefore the need is to have outreach based, household based system whereby the worker goes from house to house and really forms mothers committees, gives knowledge as to how to control malnutrition in the age group 6 months to 3 years. Then apart from this, even the ICDS doesn't work very well in the present form, because unlike in midday meal scheme where a hot cooked meal is provided, in the ICDS, in most states, of course there are exceptions, but in many states like UP, Rajasthan or Bihar, etc., we are giving what is called ready to eat food, panjiri or sattu or murmura. This kind of food is being given, which is often not palatable, which is also subject to great deal of corruption, because these contracts are all decided at the state level. Despite all these problems, there are success stories. There are states like Tamil Nadu, Kerala or Maharashtra where the scheme is doing very well. The scheme is very well established. Cooked food is being given and most children are enrolled. There is variety in the food which is being provided. Children are vaccinated and preschool education programs are also being done. There are water sources, toilets, and also there is another scheme for children below 3 years. So some of this change would require change in the Constitution of India, because if all centrally sponsored schemes today, they require, as I said, approval of the Parliament as well as approval of the state legislatures. I think we need to rethink about this issue and say, if Parliament has decided something, then it should not be financial sanction, perhaps should not be required to be approved by the legislature again. Let's also calculate how much food grain is necessary for feeding our people. And according to government statistics, 26% people are below poverty line. So if we take 100 crores as the population of India, it comes to 26 crores. Their average, the poor people's average consumption per month is 11 kg, whereas what they need is about 14 kg. So therefore, there is a gap of only 3 kg per person per month. So that will come to only about less than 10 million tons. So therefore, whatever they are getting, if we can somehow ensure that 10 million tons is made available to them, and it is they are able to consume that, then we should not have any hunger. On paper, if you look at the overall picture, one finds that the distribution of food grains through PDS has certainly increased, and this shows how it has gone up from something like 14 million tons to 29 million tons. But how much of this has actually reached the people? It also shows that food subsidy has been increasing very rapidly in our country. So we are spending but its benefit is not reaching the people. And not only that, but the expenditure on social sector is going down every year. It is very well known that on health, India spends just about 0.9% of our GDP. But what is not so well known is that because public hospitals do not function, because public services are not adequate or doctors are not there, people have to spend a great deal on health on their own. So therefore, it's a very sad commentary that people have to spend so much, and one of the factors behind poverty is this. India also doesn't get much of aid from other donors. In fact, as compared to as compared to India, Uganda gets 40 times more aid, Pakistan gets 12 times more aid, and not only that, but whatever aid we get is falling rapidly after 1990s. Even despite all that, even after saying that we are not spending enough, the total amount which gets transferred from the government of India to the states through various means is enough to wipe off poverty. As you can see, we are transferring 2 lakh crores, and even if half of that was to be sent as money order to the poor people, it will come to 56 rupees per day per poor family.
The court orders and PIL implementation, which in fact is monitoring, is the essence of public interest litigation. One of the cases which I fought as a lawyer and another as I decided as a judge, and that was an order of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court directed that in UP you catch unqualified and unregistered medical practitioners. You identify them, you publish their names, prosecute them. After 2 years of monitoring this matter, when we identified 27,000 quacks, we got 7,000 cases registered against them and 4,000 charge sheets. We found that they get bail and go back to the same clinic. After carrying out a few surveys, that hardly any doctor goes to rural areas. The clinics are lying closed, absolutely closed. It took the court 1 year to persuade the government that you mobilize doctors to go there. And then the startling facts started relieving one by another, that out of 11,000 government doctors, there are only 9,000, there are the 2,000 vacancies are there, and out of 2,000 are holding administrative posts, like directors and additional directors and assistant directors. And out of 7,000, there are 3,000 who are posted in one particular district for 15 years or more. They are doing private practice, they are not interested, they are not going there. With a lot of persuasion, we could move the government to transfer at least those who have put in 10 years. The matter was taken in appeal in Supreme Court, it's a different matter. And in 6 months, we could get only 50% of them transferred. They still, even now, they have not joined. And this year, the state government had completely hoodwinked the court by saying that we are doing a cadre review, and so therefore this year the transfers are not possible. The third thing which we are facing in UP is that we have 3 kinds of administrators in UP now. One who are either with the government, other who are out of the government on absolutely insignificant posts, and the third are out of UP, they are on deputation. Then the second problem, the officer comes to you and tells you in court, open court, there is a problem in implementation. The suggestions given by the state government themselves, 1, 2, 3, 4, one upon, they change the policy midway. Now you follow the golden rule, don't interfere in policy matters. The last question that I am posing, which is the most relevant and important question, is how do you wind up a PIL matter? How do you wind up a PIL matter? How do you finish it? How do you conclude it? 6 years, Ganga river was being cleaned. Every river projects are going. How do you do it? Now I am monitoring a matter for 3.5 years. I form a committee, wind up. The committee officers are transferred, they don't hold meetings. It may be after a couple of years. So all that the work which was done for a few years. So what I strongly suggest is that unless there is a law, unless we can give a legislative mandate to that kind of a monitoring committee which can monitor it further, and the persons who are affected by it can bring it as by way of a legal right to the court, not by way of another PIL intervention. I do hope that we may or we seek the guidance of the Supreme Court in these matters.
For the first time in living memory across Andhra Pradesh, thousands of food kitchens came up to give free gruel to people. The arrogance of the then Minister of Information, he stood up in the Andhra legislature and said, Mana Andhra Pradesamlo ganji yavaraya taagutaru? Who in our Andhra Pradesh will eat ganji? The answer came when lakhs of people queued up. In Vepur village, in Kondapur village, in Mehboob Nagar, I photographed the Sarpanch standing in the queue. That was the extent of hunger. The Sarpanch was standing in the queue for free food, and incidentally that particular free food center was run by 4 Telugu journalists. It defied comprehension. By the way, this was the year when we were boasting surplus food stocks and exporting food. At the height of the hunger that Utsa Patnaik described to you this morning, we exported 13 million tons of grain at a price lower than that of the below poverty line price. We exported grain at 5 rupees 45 paise per kilo while selling it to our poor people at 6 rupees 40 paise a kilo. Wayanad was the only district of Kerala known for in-migration, not out-migration. It was a rich district, therefore people came from central Kerala, they came from Travancore, they settled there on Adivasi land, they became the small farmers of that, the prosperous farmers of that area. They make the best pepper in the world, Malabar pepper, for which Vasco da Gama sailed across the oceans and also acquired a colony alongside. But the Malabar pepper, which is the best pepper, the premium grade pepper in the world, you can get onto the net today and go to the multi-commodity stock exchanges of the world and check. Malabar pepper is the premium grade. Because of the policies we have adopted, Malabar pepper is being destroyed by cheap pepper dumped in Kerala from Vietnam, Indonesia, Nicaragua, Sri Lanka and other places, remixed with Malabar pepper and sent out as Indian pepper to Western markets. It's killing the pepper farmers of Malabar. It is also endangering the quality of the seed, because that is now entering the food chain. The inferior, the lower grade pepper qualities are now entering the food chain. And therefore you've had pepper diseases, you've had slow wilt, you've had all kinds of problems with it. One of the greatest crises of agriculture and the agrarian societies is water. And this country is firmly moving on the path of privatization of water, which will cause a civil war in your countryside. This has been a natural resource, a God-given resource. People have always utilized it according to the rainfall. We are privatizing rainfall in that sense. Farming is now gambling. It is the Russian roulette. You know, the Russian soldiers used to play in World War II. One bullet in the gun, you switch it, put it to your head. If you're lucky, it doesn't go through your brain. It's called Russian roulette. Farming is today Russian roulette. You sow too soon, you have a drought. You sow twice, you have extra doubled input costs. Sometimes you get floods and it gets wiped out. It's become an extreme gamble for a lot of people. But it's not just that. The same communities are hurt by the commercialization of just about everything. Health costs have gone up. Education costs have gone up. Travel costs have gone up. We are talking about 260 million people in the country whom the government of India admits are poor. That is the official admission. For these people, all these prices have gone up. For hundreds of millions of Indians, globalization, sir, has been the globalization of prices, the Indianization of incomes.
We are being asked globally to go back into the same time. We are being asked to stop producing food because it is cheaper and economical to produce or import food from outside, which means you have to abandon your agriculture, get out of agriculture. We are again being asked to go back into ship-to-mouth existence, and that would mean, is the country willing to take up that choice that we would like to go back into ship-to-mouth existence, or we would like to be food secure? And let's not forget, whatever we are today, plus and minus, is because we are food secure. Those countries who have not been food secure have met the fate like Iraq or Iran or North Korea and so on. But those countries which are food secure have been able to withstand all kinds of pressures, whether it was nuclear blast or whatever it is. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to make a choice. And I think it is here as a nation we have to step in and see, is that the kind of model that is good for us? After all, if it is not good for us, why are we, as in the famous words of Mr. L.K. Advani, after the emergency, when he was asked about the media, he had said that media was asked to bend, it began to crawl. And I think what is happening in the globalized world today is our governments have only been asked to bend, but they have been crawling for quite some time now. The choice for us is whether we want these people, these poor farmers, to be food secure, to be having enough in their hands to survive.
I can safely say that as you go, that you've had a decent meeting, and we have learned a lot from your interventions, and you have learned a lot, I think, from the speakers. Thank you very much, and have a safe journey back. Thank you very much, sir.